maybe they're thinking something like, why is a physicist teaching us now? Right now, we're giving a lecture in a social science, particularly in a political science, with a research methodology. But we are talking about philosophy, and my association with Dr. Suhail has been almost for more than 10 years. When we met in Germany, we used to discuss so many things about philosophy, about politics, and during this brief conversation, now you might have got the sense how apt he is, or how well versed or how well informed he is about politics, not being in American politics or being a Pakistan or a South Asian politics. So when I talked about calling people to those who will at least give some sort of food for thought about philosophy, he was the first name that struck in my mind. So welcome to you, department, although virtually, Dr. Suhail.
Okay.
So you will be talking about Karl Popper,
yes,
and for 45 minutes, depends upon you. If you want to extend,
so I'll see
with the students.
Okay.
So welcome, and before I will hand you the mic, be very, in a very soft in the sense, keep the level a bit low, so keep it, understandable level. So over to you.
Okay, thanks. So first of all, I'm thankful to Dr. Yaqub for the kind introduction he has given to me about me. So the topic which is I'm going to discuss is about Karl Popper and his scientific methodology. So maybe Dr. Yaqub has tried to say keep the standard low, but I'll not just warn you, I'll just say that basically there are some subjects it's maybe a bit tougher. जैसे कोई चीज़ अपनी सृष्टि में थोड़ी सी मुश्किल होती है, मतलब it's bit tougher, but after some initiation, if after you just go through this lecture, or you can just go and see and just search it out, it may not look that tough after maybe so it may be an impression, it might not, you may not necessarily carry this impression after but even if it might look tough, you need not to worry or you need not to fear. That's what I'm trying to say. So so before I'm going to say what Karl Popper or his scientific methodology, or his methodology, how he viewed things, how he approached things, is that I would want to give it a brief interlude about a brief biographical introduction of Karl Popper, in the sense that he was born in the earlier part of the 19th, he was maybe in the late 18th, in the 19th century. His philosophy has been there, and his influence has been significant in trying to understand in the field of scientific methodology. Not only scientific methodology, there is a whole school or thought which is known as Popperian science or Popperian methodology, and he wrote on issues ranging from science, philosophy, logic, social sciences, and a wide array of topics. He had influenced. He had a very long and very productive career. If you see his book, for example, Logic of Scientific Discovery, Conjectures and Refutations, Open Society and Its Enemies, Poverty of Historicism. So his range or his canvas of scholarship is very huge, and his ideas have been here and there. So in today's lecture, I'll mainly be focusing on his interest in how he formulated a particular methodology, which is also known as a Popperian methodology, or which is the criteria of falsifiability. How can we say what constitutes a theory? For example, in the earlier part of the 19th century, which if you beginning of the 19th century, so people were Popper, the main theories in social sciences, since you are students of social sciences. So there have been, for example, there were theories of Sigmund Freud, there were theories of Karl Marx, there were theories of Alfred Adler, and in that context were also the theories of Albert Einstein. So So for Popper, he was in a sense influenced by all of these theories which I have just stated, but somehow he felt that the first three theories, whether that of Alder, Freud, or what I should say, Marx, they were not entirely, he did not categorize them scientific in the entire sense of the word. So maybe he felt that they were unscientific or non-scientific. Why they were not scientific in his scheme of things is because he felt that they did not entirely fulfill the criteria of how we can describe a scientific theory. And while in case of Einsteinian theory, he was very much in his earlier stages impressed by Einsteinian theory. But Einstein theory, to give a brief interlude, that Einsteinian theory was a theory of in physics, a theory in physical sciences. So it was a sort of not path breaking in the sense it was not less than a revolution when for 300 years there was a theory of Newton which is normally in common literature called Newtonian mechanics or Newtonian philosophy. So there was a philosophy which was a paradigm which was known as Newtonian paradigm. So what Einsteinian general theory of relativity did after discovery of a certain experiment, you can go and check out in Google what that in 1919 there was an experiment that bending of light about a certain angle. If a light comes nearer a star, for example sun or any other, the gravity of that star should bend. So what Newtonian theory did was that it predicted it should bend, but the accuracy was not there. But when people made observations, so they felt that the observations were more in tune or in compatible with what Einsteinian theory had predicted. So people felt that the Einsteinian revolution or Einsteinian theory was more accurate as compared to Newtonian theory. So here comes the point. So Popper felt that even though the previous three social theories, so why should we take Einstein theory truer as compared to the Newtonian theory, that it may be more accurate. So what is the criteria of describing a theory, whether the theory is accurate or not? So here comes the famous methodology which he tried to, what I should say, elucidate, or which he tried to uncover, or which he tried to work on. So to begin with, what he had is basically that there is a classical, if you say classical observationistic induction. For example, how we can say there is something called induction. Induction means you start from a particular example. For example, if you say that a ball will, if there is a stone, you throw a stone and stone due to gravity of earth, it will go down. If you just have some another thing like, for example, a metal, you throw again another example, you say it will go down. So if you repeat the example with different things, you say every other thing, if you on the planet Earth, if you say due to gravity it goes down. So you start from one example and you generalize it to many examples, and you exhaust as many examples as possible. So it's a process of induction. So you start from one example and you test case by case as many examples as possible. So it's a search, how the methodology of empirically observing things, how we test things. This is known as classical induction. You go from a particular statement, and if the particular statement is true for large number of statements, and you generalize it into a general statement, which is known as induction, how the method of induction. It's used in mathematics as well as it's used in sciences, particularly how we make a general statement which is later called law or whatever, that all things attract. How do we say all things attract? Because whichever way we see things, we have always seen things falling down. This means earth attracts, so earth has gravity. So if we generalize statement that all masses, they attract each other, greater the mass, if tomorrow we find a counter example that if for example you throw something, it doesn't go down, it goes up, we say there is exception to the rule. So it's not, the inductive method may not be generalized as a law or as a statement, as a general statement. So as a classical induction, induction means going from general to particular. Deduction means you start from a general statement, you go from general to particular. You have a general truth or you statement, you are going to see whether it goes, you check it. So what to what Popper felt that Popper felt this classical inductionistic, observationistic, inductionist account of science, it had some problems of verifiability and falsifiability. For example, so if you just see Popper, what Popper was trying to say, the Popperian way of doing the induction. You can go, if you study philosophy, people like.
Excuse me, sir.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Sir, you said that whatever object is having a mass that attracts other things, sir.
Yes.
Sir, when Einstein gave his theory m equal to m naught under root of 1 minus v square by c square,
Uh-huh.
that time this m tends to be infinity, sir. So why the body having the velocity which is approaching to c, the mass of that very body tends to be infinity. If it is so, then why that body isn't attracting the other bodies
No,
around that very particular body?
I'm starting with the basics. I'm starting. That's a case. That may be a case that at moving masses, if a body moves at very higher velocities, its mass is going to increase very much. So how it is going to affect the gravitation? I'm not saying that. Here I am basically discussing that how we start from a particular observation and we generalize it to a general statement. Particular observation is things attract. So we have seen 2 things attracting, 3 things attracting. So whichever mass we have seen all masses are attracting. This gives us that things are attracting. So whichever way, so it's not that heavier masses attract will more or moving masses will attract more. So that's part of this statement. So I'm here focusing on that we can generalize a particular statement to a general statement by methodology of empirical observations, which is known as induction. So here I'm going to focus on that. So I'm not focusing on that's also, you can say that moving masses will attract more attraction because the mass is going to increase. That's a separate statement. So here I am saying how we have a methodology of induction particularly per se. So that's a different thing. So this induction, for example, we normally say, for example, in the Popperian sense, the sun rises every day, we know. So, but the statement is we have seen sun always rising every other day. But if somebody says that one fine day sun did not rise, so this is the exception to the rule. So we have to modify our statement. Maybe sun doesn't rise every day. Since centuries or since we have been born, we have seen always sun going from east to west, or how it's rising early in the morning and it's setting it's setting in the evening. But if one fine morning we'll wake up and we'll say that sun did not rise, so the statement, so our previous knowledge of our understanding of that sun rises every day, we have to modify this statement. That sun doesn't rise every other day. Or the other statement is, for example, in a given day, for example, on a given day sun doesn't rise. So but the statement, you have to make bit qualification. What do you mean by a given day? So in both these, so given day means we have to be in perpetual this thing in future, past, future, perfect. Maybe there will come some day where sun will not rise. So we have to test it for an impending future. So these 2 statements, so you cannot generalize a particular inductivistic statement for perfect future. So induction as a methodology, how much it is true as a problem of how we are going to verify a given general statement. So can it be true for all times to come or not? So what Popper wanted us to say, that he felt that induction, classical induction, somehow is not a valid source of knowledge, which was held previously by philosophers like Hume, or other, who just characterized induction as a very important source of knowledge. For example, you say 1 plus 1 is 2. So algebraically or arithmetically it's always true. But in practical scheme of things, for example, 1 apple and 1 orange, can they be true or not? So they may be true. One apple plus 1 orange means 2 fruits. But there is a difficulty of saying 1 apple plus 1 orange is what? 2. You cannot say there are 2 apples or 2 oranges. So theoretically, as an induction, it might be true. But empirically, in the Popperian sense, there is always, you can add as a something as a source of knowledge. So classical empiricism, classical inductive empiricism for Popper had some problems, and what he wanted, he gave us a criteria how we can. So this is the problem of induction, what Popper was saying. So, and there was certain. So how we have to just say how he characterized this really problem of induction. What he was basically saying that the induction problem, what he characterized this problem, he in his literature, what he called it was, he called it the problem of, or principle of demarcation. So what constitutes knowledge as such? So in the scheme of before post Popper and before Popper, people like Poincare, people like Hume, Mill, Whitehead, Russell, so they had put a very heavy faith when we try to discuss scientific methodology. The classical inductivistic empirical induction was taken as a very serious methodology, but Popper somehow felt that there needs to be a categorification of how we can categorize, how we can make a categorification of what we construe as knowledge. Maybe Popperian way of looking at things is also what we construe knowledge as such. For example, if you say knowledge in the traditional sense, the word knowledge is called justified true belief is called knowledge. But true belief, when we say belief means something subjective, means belief. For example, you might have a religious belief also, you might have a metaphysical belief also, you might have other beliefs also. For example, you might have belief in hereafter, you might have belief in God, or you might have belief in certain mathematical propositions, certain philosophical assumptions. But whether they can be tested or not, so the belief system is there. So those justified true belief is knowledge. But if you can verify your belief, so what is the touchstone or testing stone by which you can test those belief systems? So what Popper did, or before people like Immanuel Kant, Hume, they grappled with this question of what we say as knowledge. So in a Kantian sense, there was something called priori and a priori knowledge. Priori means posteriori and a priori. A priori means truths or belief systems which you take as intuitive. They are there. You intuitively know something is true. And posteriori means you just try to see it empirically whether it's true or not. So there comes two statements called analytical statements and synthetic statement. Maybe people should go and see what's analytical and synthetic statement. In synthetic statement, there is always scope of adding something new to the original statement. So what Popper did was, he said that how we can characterize knowledge. So if knowledge is if knowledge is justified true belief, and true beliefs, when we say belief system, so it means that you can have philosophical beliefs, you can have religious beliefs, you can have metaphysical beliefs, you can have mathematical assumptions. This is one system, one clarification. And then you can we test those very assumptions, metaphysical assumptions, philosophical assumptions, maybe intuitive notions with regard to the empirical or experimental aspects of the reality. So if there is one-to-one relationship. Normally how we construct scientific knowledge is that your hypotheses or your belief systems or your theories should be empirically, if we say that we can empirically also observe them or you can test them, so you can say that this is known as so you can, it can be characterized as scientific knowledge. So empirically, if you can test things case by case in an empirically inductive methodology, which was previously well tested. So this is the way we can say this constitutes a scientific knowledge. But what Popper felt, or what Popper just said, that this criteria of classical inductivistic empirical way of testing or verifying testing things should be replaced with a criteria, and that criteria will be called the criteria of what I should say called criteria of falsifiability. So previously what Popper called or Popperian methodology was of basically what we construct demarcation, the problem of demarcation, which was also basically Kant also engaged with the problem what is knowledge, and in that knowledge what are truths, what are empirical truths, what are metaphysical truths, what are what I should say mathematical truths or logical truths, and what are scientific truths. So this is a problem of demarcation. And from this problem of demarcation comes the problem of what we construe as scientific knowledge. So in scientific knowledge, we have an empirically inductive way of characterizing things. So on case by case, for example, if you have seen sun rises every day, we have seen sun rising today, tomorrow, or we have seen sun rising since hundreds of years. So we will generalize this statement that in future also sun will always rise, because we have been seen empirically case by case that sun will also rise in future perfect. Or we have, if we have seen that things go to earth, so earth is attract, earth has something in it, it will attract things, maybe for 1-2 things, but we are going to generalize this statement for all future times to come. This is empirical method or scientific method. Maybe there are other methods, maybe for example mathematical method, or also there is something called mathematical induction also, the way there is scientific induction. Or there may be metaphysical systems or philosophical systems or maybe even religious systems which may not be necessarily be verifiable, but lot of people will construct or construe them as knowledge, like people like Berkeley or even people like metaphysical beliefs of religion. So but the way Kant categorized this categorization of how the problem of what I should say, what I call the problem of demarcation, how Karl Popper took it, basically he said that maybe though so he introduced the notion something called falsifiability as a criteria how we can test the knowledge. So he said that this classical inductionistic empirical way of looking at things is not entirely sufficient to prove for us whether a system or a knowledge system can be derived from this. From inductive statements you arrive at a particular general statement, so that is not sufficient enough. For example, if he says what Popper says, for example, he says that it will rain or not rain here tomorrow will not be regarded as an empirical statement. Why? Simply because it will not be refuted. For Popper, for example, if you say that it will not rain tomorrow or it will rain tomorrow, so you cannot refute this statement fundamentally. What Popper said that if we introduce this statement, it will rain here tomorrow, so you are giving a particular place that it is going to here rain tomorrow. So when you introduce that, so tomorrow if you are going to be at that point, you will say, you definitely see either it will rain, you can check it, either it will rain and it has rained at that place or not. So this is a verifiable statement. So the previous two statements, it will rain or it will not rain tomorrow, they are not verifiable statements. So Popper wanted us to give us a criteria of falsifiability. If a theory, or if you have an induction as a valid methodology by which you are going to generalize your observations towards a general statement or a law, for that statement to be verifiable, or he introduced a notion called falsifiability or falsifiability criteria. He just said that a theory cannot be said to be true unless and until there is a scope or scheme by which we can show that for example, show that it can be, and there can be example by which we can show that it can be proved either wise, either it's true or either it is not true empirically. For example, for I do not demand, this is what Popper says, these are his words, for I do not demand that every scientific statement must have in fact been tested before it's accepted. I only demand that every statement must be capable of being tested. Or in other words, I refuse to accept the view that there are statements in science which we have resignedly to accept as true merely because it does not seem possible for logical reasons to test them. So if you say that for logical reasons, according to Popper, that I will not be able to test it, but it is a statement. So for Popper, it's not a sufficient criteria. For a theory to be true, there should be inbuilt in the theory a mechanism by which we can test a theory, and there should be an open-ended way by which we should prove some examples there should be examples which can be tested empirically within the theory, so that either you can show that the theory is true or theory is not true. So this is the criteria of theory which is to be which Popper said. So even though it's the theory, Popper started in a very negativistic sense. So in this sense that a theory can only be regarded a theory till we don't in that very theory have examples which will prove it otherwise. Even this theory can be Popperian thing can be also justified. For example, there is another scientist called Sir Arthur Eddington. How he described theory is that theories are like nets which catch fishes. For example, if you go to a river, so if you want to catch smaller fishes, you will make the meshes finer and finer and finer. You will make smaller meshes. So the theory will be you have to make the theory meshes finer and finer so that you can. So in the same way, if you want to test a theory in a particular way, you are going to check it, narrow down the criteria and try to find the counterexample till you don't reach the ultimate a theory which will pass through all those tests. So it's a sort of a continuous progression of continuously trying to see things which will in a sense, I'll say that it's a criteria, the Popperian methodology of how we describe a theory is a sort of methodology which has very much influenced the way people are doing sciences, physical sciences in general. Maybe the methodology also in literature, it might also have had an influence on how maybe people are also doing social sciences also. How, if for example in a statistical methodology, if you are going to go for a survey, so you are always going to, if you start with an assumption or a theory or a bias or whatever you might want to call it, so if you want to see whether it is true or not, so what is that? So the theory should have a scope of being tested negative or positive. So you should, if you want to say whether theory is right, so you should have examples which will prove it right. Or if you, till there is not a scope or an example by which you can prove a theory to be wrong, so for criteria, the for Popper, it doesn't come to the way he would like to describe how he constructed the theory as such. So this is the broad way, I would say. This is in literature called scientific. This is known as falsifiability criteria. So what I'll just these are Popper's words. What Popper says in his book. If there's a good book of Popper, Logic of Scientific Discovery, people should read it if they can. So, but I'm just quoting him. What he says: a scientist, whether theorist, experimental, puts forward statements or a system of statements and tests these step by step. In the field of empirical sciences, more particularly, he constructs hypotheses or systems of theories and tests them against experience by observation and experiment. So this sums up what Popperian philosophy or what Popperian methodology is as such. So this is this much. So, and maybe his another statement is the problem of finding a criteria which would enable us to distinguish between empirical sciences on the one hand and mathematics and logic as well as metaphysical systems on the other hand. I will call this problem of demarcation. This is what I have said. Problem. So there should be a criteria by which you can demarcate empirical sciences on the other hand, one side, and mathematical or metaphysical systems or philosophical systems. For metaphysical systems may also include, for example, religious beliefs, religious systems. For example, people believe in hereafter. People believe in certain that you will be rewarded in so hereafter, or some notions of which may not be tested empirically in this world only. So Popper wanted a criteria of knowledge where you can, on the one side you have there should be a way we have empirical things. Empirical things means you can test by observation, you can test by your senses and logic. And on the right hand side there should are mathematical systems, metaphysical systems, philosophical systems. So you should be able to have that criteria should be there, which is known as problem of so. And one thing I want to say is that for Popper, metaphysics has usually been defined as non-empirical. So metaphysical statements means things which are not physical statements. Statements which go beyond physicality. Beyond physicality means, for example, you cannot verify them immediately, or in remote past or remote, they might be true. I'm not saying that their validity is they are true statements or they are not true statements. What I am saying that for Popper, the scientific methodology is basically an empirical methodology, but in that empirical methodology, the metaphysical statements in the Popperian sense are not empirical statements. So they are outside the domain of science to begin with for Popper. So theory of knowledge, whose task is analysis of method or procedure peculiar to empirical science, may accordingly be described as the theory of empirical method. So these are his statements. Maybe Popper also has his own share of critiques. For example, in modern day sciences, for example, if the universe started, if the Big Bang has started, so you cannot replicate Big Bang. So how we can? So in a scientific theory, for example, you should have not only the problem of verification and false. You should have also think of something called replicability. For example, if an experiment you are going to do here in Srinagar, you should be able to replicate the same experiment in New Delhi or New York or any other place. And you should also have those criteria of falsifiability not only here, in any other part of the universe as such. So in the general sense of the word, what I am trying to say. So I again say, quote, how he in the falsifiability say Popperian words. So falsifiability, I'll just again try to rephrase in the words of Popper what falsifiability. Objects for Popper. Objects are bound to be raised against my proposal to adopt falsifiability as our criteria for deciding whether or not a theoretical system belongs to empirical science. So there should always be a criteria of deciding whether or not a theoretical system belongs to empirical science or not. So this is what Popper believes, or what Popper wants us to take as a seriously as a methodology, which has had a very significant influence from last 40-50 years of how we check scientific theories. For example, even if there are social science students, but people have a general interest in science also. For example, there was this recently experiment in LHC, so or in any lab. So you are going to test things case by case. So you say that a statement is true, but we want to take it, maybe let us check it whether the statement is true at this energy or at this level or not. So that will extend the verifiability or the regime of a theory from known to unknown. So how much you are going to test the limits of a theory by always trying to search for the counterexamples. So till the point we are not able to find a counterexample, we say that theory is right or exact, or the theory seems to be right. So in the search of counterexamples, or testing the current theory to its ultimate limits, to its ultimate boundaries, we are also extending the boundary of ignorance to knowledge. We are going to test it further and further, and if we find a counterexample empirically also, then we say that this theory has limits. So its regime of validity is up to this time, and now we need some another theory which will explain this anomaly or this counterexample which was not explained by the previous theory. So this methodology has been very much there since 30-40 years, and further I would say, as a part of a metaphysical belief of Popper, before I'm going to, I'll just 2-3 minutes. So for Popper, maybe he was in some sense a successor of Bertrand Russell. So for Popper, what he says, I'll just quote him: the class of potential falsifiers of tautological and metaphysical statements are empty. So for Popper, he thought that metaphysical statements or tautological statements means agreed upon linguistics to rules. Maybe they may be logical statements, or there may be mathematical statements, or there may be theoretical assumptions, or belief systems, metaphysical systems, which may be derived from religion. They may be derived from free metaphysical beliefs. So he feels that those class of potential falsifiers of all tautological and metaphysical statements are empty. Means he negates them per se. He doesn't take them as a part of a hypothesis, so as a criteria. Even though he feels that the empirical, metaphysics, he somehow feels that that should be taken as a, maybe there are certain potential empirical statements which we have not tested as of now, but for future. So he takes them, they have potential of getting verified, true or otherwise, as compared to the statements which may be based on metaphysical and tautological statements. So to sum up, I would rather say that the Popperian methodology of trying to further improvise on the how people from Immanuel Kant and other philosophers, how they construe, how they define knowledge, and how he rephrased the problem of knowledge, defining knowledge as problem of demarcation of knowledge. On the one box, on the one side, he thought of there are empirical and scientific statements. On the right hand side, he thought of metaphysical, mathematical, or philosophical statements. How we can make a relation between the two, and what is something called scientific knowledge, how we define scientific knowledge as such, and what is the classical inductivistic empirical program, how of thing, how it has to be modified, how it has in the wake of verifiability or the falsifiability criteria, which is very much the way Popper defined it, the falsifiability criteria. So I'll stop at here and students can ask questions. Hello? Hello?
So now you can ask questions. If you have any comments, students, feel free.
Yes. So it's not necessary that maybe you might have understood everything. You need to bit. So I'll just maybe recommend you. There's a book, Logic of Scientific Discovery by Popper. You can, if you don't understand it, but if you should have a bit of initiation of philosophy of as such. And he has written other books since you are students of social sciences, Open Society and Its Enemies, Volume 1 and 2. So there are. So you can have bit of initiation and bit of background, and that it may not seem that tough as such. And further is how in a traditional society, for example, we have certain metaphysical belief systems. So what is knowledge as such? So scientists unconsciously, if you are social scientists or you are a scientist, physical scientists, so they have a methodology which is not normally in your schools or in your, we unconsciously are unconscious workers of that methodology. We don't sometimes question that methodology. In Kashmiri there is something called gold standards, how we are going to test what is true or what is not true, what is right. So what is knowledge, how we are going to test it. So if you, for example, we are a religious society, in a religious society we have put in particular metaphysical or religious belief systems, we can test it. For empiricists, it's a particular, so but every way, what is the criteria of testing a theory or belief system, whether it's a metaphysical belief system, a religious belief system, or scientific belief system. So what is the criteria of testing it? So what are the assumptions of testing it? So this is a general question, but in that question you can also just address this question, Popperian methodology of testing things, by which he arrived at falsifiability criteria, how we can test whether a theory is right or wrong, or what is a theory as such. So I'll just, this is what I'm trying to say. Yes, now you can ask whatever question. It's not, you feel free to ask anything, whatever if you feel like.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, what Big Bang theory says, has that been proved empirically?
A lot of people are critiquing Popper in the sense, Big Bang thing is that something which has happened, 16 billion years ago or not. But there is an empirically, you can verify it. For example, there is a certain microwave background, a wave which was existing at that point. So a 3 Kelvin radiation was there, which might have started there, and we can even now, with our telescopes, we can say that the radiation, we do some theoretical calculations, we can see that wave or that radiation is there. Or if we want, for example, if you have, for example, a bomb or something like that, grenade, also if it explodes, so imaginatively you can retrodeductively, you can, if you go the splinters and make them come back, they'll reconstitute the splinters and you can come back to the original before it had got exploded. In the same way, the way we are observing the universe, observational universe, we are seeing that galaxies are moving fast away from each other at a very fast speed. and we make assumptions that if we extrapolate in time backwards, they might have started at some earlier thing, which was very compact mass, which we call Big Bang. One thing maybe regarding Popperian methodology means, can we recreate a Big Bang? So maybe this question may not be addressed in the Popperian methodology, because a Big Bang has happened. One thing which has happened has happened. Yes. Feel free to ask any question, whatever you feel like. But maybe one thing that you can extrapolate this you in the process, for example, in as compared to the physical sciences, in terms of as when you compare them with the social sciences like sociology, political sciences, maybe the data is always not you cannot strictly cohere to this Popperian methodology. So because there are a lot of anomalies as such. So to just testing but at least the frame, you should be aware of the frame. If you are making the theory or assumptions, how we are going to test a theory, examples, searching for counter examples. That's point in the Popperian sense. You can people have questions, you can.
Dr. Suhail, could you highlight a bit more about this falsification of theory of Popper? And very briefly, probably I missed it.
Falsifiability means a theory. If you make a theory, for example, a theory there should be an inbuilt in a theory a criteria by which we can prove a theory can be proved right or wrong. For example, I said the statement that it is going to rain tomorrow. So you cannot prove the statement in the general sense. You can say, but if I say in a more precise sense that the rain will not happen at this place tomorrow, so you have made a precise criteria. If it's not going to rain tomorrow at this place, so you will say it has not rained at this place. So if I say it will not rain tomorrow, but maybe in Kashmir for some places it has rained. So when I say it will not rain at this place, for example, Navgam or this Srinagar tomorrow, so it's a precise statement. So in a theory, there should be a precise. You should have a precise. Theory should have a possibility of just proving counter examples which will verify a theory. So there should be scope by which we can have counter examples which will prove a theory right or wrong. It should be precise enough. The verifiability criteria should be precise enough by virtue of these examples. Is it clear, or maybe?
Yes. So anybody else?
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, go ahead, Enough.
Yes, sir. So what does Karl Popper mean by historicism?
Actually, I have maybe downloaded his text on historicism, but maybe I may be vaguely wrong. I don't know exactly. You can check it. I can be wrong also. Maybe maybe in the historical method. So how historians, for example, or archaeologists or historians, so how they are going to test a theory, for example, a previous hypothesis. For example, there was a king. Maybe, for example, there is a king called Firdausi has written a document, Shahnama. But he was a court poet. But court poets, maybe the people, modern day historians, maybe they are taking those examples. Maybe if we don't have a valid historical document about a particular era, so we have to rely on these historical these manuscripts. What is the methodology by which we can construct history going back? So maybe the biases, for example, if quote poets were, it's a general thing, historians normally say that if they were being supported by quotes, maybe they will not say something which is against the kings in a very hard sense. So how, if we go back, if we have a historically, what is the historical method by which a historian is going to reconstruct the past history? So what the methodology of it? So how much? So the scientific method is, you can define. You have to always prove the counterexamples. But in case of historical method, how we can go back and reconstruct history? And there are a lot of biases of historians of writing the history, and how we can reconstruct history. So maybe he might be the method of the method of how reconstructing history, and maybe poverty of historicism. Maybe I have read it. Maybe you can recheck it. Maybe I may be wrong. So maybe it's how you reconstruct the methodology of reconstructing the historical method and the problems associated with it. Yes. Any other question?
I think they are done with
Okay, that's fine.
today's lecture then.
Okay, that's
So, one request, Dr. Suhail, can you, send us good readings about Karl Popper? If you have
definitely.
some material or a book, so I can share with them.
Oh,
They will
okay.
go through it.
Yes. We'll just send it.
So, अगर कुछ और बोलना है तो पूछना
हाँ,
है.
आप पूछते सकते हैं, वट एवर आप जो भी पूछना सकते हैं, फील फ्री, आप उर्दू में जो भी है, कश्मीरी में जो भी, इफ यू वांट टू आस्क यू कैन, आप बताइए, मैं कोशिश करूँगा जवाब देने की. डरने के बगैर.
लेकिन ये बहुत ज्यादा शरीफ बच्चे हैं, कुछ बोलते नहीं है.
नहीं अंदर से है ना, इफ यू फील लाइक कुछ भी है यार, जो डर गया वो मर गया है ना. जो भी है, इवन इफ यू कैन फील लाइक रॉन्ग, वही है ना पॉपर का क्राइटेरिया, दैट यू शुड ऑलवेज बी एबल टू फाइंड अ काउंटर एग्जाम्पल इन ए थ्योरी which will try to say that whether तो डरना नहीं है, you should always be open for a counter example. My hypothesis may be right or wrong. So which will test your theory to next level. तो counter example से नहीं डरना है.
So, Dr. Suhail, how do we use Popperian view or a theory vis-a-vis religious beliefs or vis-a-vis the religion?
हाँ, here I
Let's
would
take
say,
example of
नहीं religious belief में ये है कि Popper, that's what I was saying ना, Popper in the first place वो थोड़ा he is bit more than as compared to Bertrand Russell, or he doesn't, in his scheme of writings Popperian methodology, he जो metaphysical statements हैं or tautological, which I said, they don't construe even scientific statements, they are empty. In Popperian construction of knowledge, he doesn't take religious statements, so he will not construct them as a valid schemes of knowledge. वो उसको base hypothesis से ही खारिज करता है. So that's it. So that's what I'm saying. But you can, it's not that end of the world. People like Whitehead, Professor Whitehead and other philosophers, you can also have epistemes, or where you can take metaphysical belief systems or some things which is not necessarily verifiable by Popperian criteria. Popperian criteria is one way of how he constructed knowledge and verification of knowledge and falsifiability criteria. But for example, in a religious method, it is slightly different from the scientific method. In the religious method, for example, you start with general truths. You believe in God, hereafter. So and then you go from general to particular. If you have belief system, for example, honesty is the best policy. It's a statement. So why you want to be honest? Maybe you believe in God will reward you in hereafter. You start with some general statement, but then you are going to see in your real life whether it will help it or not. So case by case. So if honesty is the best, so you are going to see it. I have been honest. I have. So if in a general large class of statements you say that it is right, honesty is the best policy, it will collaborate your general statement. Maybe belief in honest, he will God will reward you not only in this world for honesty but also in hereafter. So that prior metaphysical belief or statement might be a true, but it is not an inductive way. It's a deductionistic way of proving things. You don't start from particular to particular to general statement. In the induction sense, you start from deductive statement. You start from a general statement, a deductive statement, and then you just prove in a inductive way, in a particular case by case way. So for Popper, metaphysical and these statements are not, he doesn't take them, or tautological statements or mathematical statements, he doesn't take them as in the demarcation of knowledge as entirely a valid system of knowledge. But you can in principle have other systems, other philosophical systems which have been developed by other philosophers, who you can just include those metaphysical beliefs as a way of describing knowledge as such. Even Immanuel Kant, you can say Immanuel Kant's categorification somehow can address partly this question, because his philosophy is bit empiricism and idealism. He somehow tried to, because on one side there are materialists, on right hand side there are idealists, so there is a middle ground of merging idealism and materialism. Maybe Immanuel Kant belonged to that tradition partially. So maybe in idealistic system you have religious and metaphysical beliefs. Maybe you can categorize there. But how you can make them relevant to the empirical aspects of the world in the loose sense or larger sense? So that's it. So there are different philosophies as such. You have to see. Yes. Maybe one thing is that when you go from a physical science to social, an idea from one science, maybe physical Popperian methodology, you just extrapolate to social sciences, or you have an idea in the social sciences, you just take it to physical science. So this is the way knowledge process is like. It's not that a scientist is working in some remote lab, a biochemist is working a nuclear physicist. So they have something to do with the larger world, society also. So there are feedback loops both ways.
Your voice is breaking.
There are feedback loops. No, it's fine.
Seems.
So there are feedback loops both ways, society as well as this thing. Now it's right.
No.
Okay. Now it's fine.
Probably you can put off your video.
Okay. No, I have not a video. I do not have a video. Okay. I have video on from other phone. Okay. So any other question, like you can just.
So
if you have questions, so if you feel like.
So now I don't think there are any more questions from students. So we will end it here.
Okay, that will be fine.
So thank you, Dr. Suhail. I hope and I believe students got what they were searching for, actually food for thought, where they will go back to their reading rooms and read something and on Karl Popper, and I think that's why I was telling them last time that why Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper and these theorists they were actually from a science background, from science discipline.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so right now they may not be able to find the relevance why we the students from political science are studying them, but maybe in MPhil or a PhD on after masters, when they will go in a research area or go some other disciplines or in a field, they will understand its relevance and its importance, why they need it in the past to read or study Popper and Cohen. So again, thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Suhail.
Okay.
And if again, if they want to be in touch with you, or if they had any more queries, so
So I'm
they can
available.
reach
I'm
out
available.
to you.
Yes, 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 yes. I'm available.
So